So I finally watched the P. Diddy documentary, which from what I understand was funded by 50 Cent. 50 Cent, I have to give props to him. He has done so much for the visibility of the petty community. So for that, I am eternally grateful.
He got old real fast. He went to his hair was jet black. Like mine, and the next day he was like a full. All I saw from was the raccoon pictures from the courtroom. When they drove him, it was looked like a raccoon.
So I watched the documentary, and it's been a while since I've heard somebody described as having such a scary personality as P. Diddy was described as having. You should definitely watch the documentary for yourself. I'm not going to be summarizing it in this video, but I'm just going to give you 6 psychological takeaways that I had from the documentary. So without further ado, let's get started. My first takeaway from the documentary, which just keeps coming up over and over and over again in life, is hurt people hurt people. I don't believe that people, namely children, are born violent. I believe that violence and abuse are basically intergenerational curses, that they're passed down from one generation onto the next, onto the next. Now, in Diddy's case, there were different people that knew him in the documentary who spoke about how his parents didn't teach him right from wrong. His dad died when he was young, and he had this idealized image of his dad as a gangster. And the way that kids make sense and make meaning of their parents is a huge predictor of the way they're going to turn out. If they, for instance, see their dad being violent towards their mom, whether they make meaning of that and think, wow, that's so sick, I want to be like him, or wow, that's horrible, I want to be nothing like him, largely determines how they're going to turn out later. And so the fact that he had this idealized image of a violent dad is kind of a problem. Interviewees of the documentary also talked about how his mom was working a lot, sometimes even at strip clubs. They shared this one clip of his mom sharing that in front of an audience where Diddy was on stage, I think at a talk show or something, and he looked so incredibly uncomfortable and embarrassed that she shared that. They also said that his mom really knew how to throw a party, and it's not clear to me to what extent there was illegal activity at these parties, but the implication sort of seemed to be that these parties exposed Diddy from a young age to both entertainment and how to have a good time, how to entertain other people, but also debauchery. They also described Diddy as a kid being quite goofy and being picked on by other kids, while also at home experiencing beating that made me scared. And even his mom later on admitted that she did beat Diddy quite a bit. There was one quote that really stood out to me from the documentary. Somebody said, "I know people shaped by pain and people shaped by love. And if you're shaped by more pain than love, watch out." I think that is so true. Like I said, I think that kids are born pure and innocent in this world, and unfortunately, there are adults who take advantage of that and who mistreat them or who don't raise them right. And you can literally see how that shapes them into the person they will be as an adult. People who are shaped by pain rather than shaped by love sometimes go on to be very scary people, and certainly not all. Some people choose to actually work on themselves and do things differently than the older generations that raised them. But for those that don't, yeah, indeed, watch out. And this is not an excuse, it's just an explanation. It's just, forward thinking, why we need to stop the cycle of intergenerational trauma. It's not something that should ever be used to excuse abusive behavior. Number 2, beware of people who are extremely envious. One thing that really struck me from the documentary was how incredibly envious Diddy was described as being of other artists. He saw them as rivals, he tried to steal their formula for success, he tried to steal their girlfriends, their ex-girlfriends, and ultimately when he determined he couldn't beat them, he tried to eliminate them, according to the people of this documentary. Which is kind of proof that haters are your biggest fans. The people who are obsessing over you and dissecting you in the most hateful, obsessive way, they're actually your biggest fans. They're trying to figure out your formula, but they can't do it. Now, you know my stance, all emotions are normal, including envy. There is nothing wrong with feeling envy. We all feel it. But excessive envy can be a criterion of narcissistic personality disorder. And not just that, but also feeling like other people envy you. Because as we know, narcissists tend to project quite a bit. two-sided. So they envy other people, but also in their minds, everybody's envying them. Why is envy so integral to narcissism? Because for people with that personality structure, it's all about placing themselves in a hierarchy. They're always comparing with other people. They always want to know, do I have a leg up? Am I superior to them in whatever way? And if they determine that they're not, they're going to feel very envious about that. And like I said, there's nothing wrong with feeling envy, but what you choose to do, it can become destructive. So if you try to tear other people down, instead of just working on improving yourself or accepting that other people are just going to have things that you can't have, that's when it starts to become problematic. For example, in the documentary, people talked about how he was like trying to dissect a Tupac song so that he could emulate its success. How he was really jealous of Tupac and Biggie's relationship at one point. People said he was very threatened by Tupac. People in the business suspect he shot Tupac. Someone described him having envy of his artists, being jealous of their talents, wanting to emulate death row records. So it seems like there was a lot of confused inspiration, for lack of a better phrase. You know, like he was inspired by these people, but instead of accepting that in a positive way, it turned into this really toxic form of envy. Number 3, abusers give people incentives to be quiet. One victim described how when she asked people for help after what she experienced, the response was usually either, what do you want me to do about it? Or if I help you, I'm not going to be able to get into his parties anymore. And the way I see it, if someone responds like that, if they say like, oh, you know, I want to help you, but I want to get into his parties again, they're kind of cut from the same cloth as that person. They kind of want to take part in the same behaviors. They want to take part in the same depravity. So like, yeah, obviously those people are not going to help you. It was really sad to hear that, you know, she reached out for help from different people and it was just ignored. Everyone just kind of swept it under the rug. There's one person who witnessed Diddy allegedly beating his first wife, and he later excused it as just a bad moment. And he went on to be the godfather of his first child. Somebody else was saying, if you want to make it in this industry, you have to work with gatekeepers like him. And so this person kind of buried the fact that they suspected he might have shot someone. When something like this happens, when you have, you know, like hundreds of people coming forward and accusing someone of abuse, we can often sit back and wonder, like, how could this happen? How could this go on for so long? How could this guy run under the radar for so long? How come no one said something or did something? The truth is, people are selfishly motivated. You know, yeah, they want to be good people. Some of them are good people. But at the end of the day, they want to put food on the table. They want to succeed in an industry. They want to not cause conflict with this person. They want to be invited to the parties. They don't want to put a target on their back. So people are much more motivated by the selfish incentives that abusers give them than by doing the right thing. Takeaway number 4, I thought it was terrifying how fake manipulators can be. I thought it was so chilling how we watched that footage of Diddy like responding to some sort of beef at an award show. He was pretending to take the high road while scheming violent revenge. Also so uncomfortable how he would like put on this very charismatic facade on his show, how he could charm people when he needed them, how he acted like he was Biggie's best friend in the press while people in the industry suspect he ushered Biggie to his death, how he like pretended to love his fans and then went into his car and was talking about how dirty he felt because he'd been touching them. And I think this is why people should be cautious when somebody is sharing a personal experience that they had with someone or sharing, you know, abuse that they endured. Please don't fall into the trap of, oh, but he was so nice to me. You know, I had this interaction with him and he was perfectly fine with me. I know someone who does this, somebody who just kind of assumes that they're like best friends with someone after just 10 minutes of talking to them. And it is so incredibly frustrating because oftentimes those people turn out to be not great individuals, but they straight up don't believe it. It's like, no, this person's been lovely to me. And it's like, okay, but should we judge a person based on how they are at their best or how they are at their worst and how often they're at their worst and how recently they've been at their worst? You know, I think these are important questions to ask. Like, we all do harmful things. We all slip up, certainly. How often? How awful are we talking? How long ago was it? You know, like, has this person grown since then? Another takeaway I had was that the justice system continuously fails victims. So it was a mixed verdict that he got in his trial, but a stunning victory for him, from life in prison, which is what he was possibly facing, he only got 50 months. Diddy hired 8 lawyers, and the documentary talks about how his team was trying to control the narrative by telling vloggers who were there what to highlight every day. Also, the jury was not sequestered. They had access to social media. Obviously, it really reminds me of the Depp Heard trial and what a shitfest that was. One juror was saying, like, she would go home and she would see these headlines of things that supposedly happened in court, and she was like, what are they talking about? Like, that didn't happen. One of the jurors they interviewed, the older man, did not have any understanding of abuse dynamics whatsoever, seemed to kind of think that Cassie, for instance, was partly to blame for the abusive relationship because she kept coming back, which just like, zero understanding of how abusive relationships work, why victims end up coming back. And he had this really stupid metaphor that was like about clapping. It was like, you can't clap with one hand. He made mistakes, but she also made mistakes. And so, sorry, I'm getting heated. It just makes me think that, like, wouldn't it be better if instead the justice system had like a panel of experts in whatever was on trial? So, for example, if you are dealing with like abuse allegations, have a panel of experts in domestic violence. After filming this, I noticed that many South Asian women were talking about how this is a common phrase back home used to victim blame women who open up about SA. Obviously, like the metaphor, the phrase itself that you can never clap with one hand can be insightful in some contexts, but using it to invalidate the experiences of victims is incredibly problematic. If you're a woman from South Asia, I'd love to hear more about your perspective on this. And they also interviewed a female juror who to me seemed like a little bit parasocial in the way she was talking about Diddy. She was sort of like acting like she knew his mannerisms personally because she's watched his show. And I was just kind of wondering, like, how did such a fangirl get accepted onto the jury? She said that she wasn't like a personal fan of his, that she was just a fan of like the music, the culture at the time, but that was not the way it came off to me. So I also think we need to vet jurors much more carefully with cases like this. Another takeaway was powerful people do scary things. I think this is a direct quote from the documentary. Somebody said he was a different Sean Combs back then at age 19. And that, of course, raises the question, does money and fame change a person, or does it just bring out who you already were all along? I personally think money and fame just bring out who you are. There are people who accumulate a lot of power and wealth and choose to do good things with it, or even at the very least, just like mind their own business, just like try to pay the bills for their family, try to just, do their own thing. And then obviously there are a lot of people who, once they accumulate a certain amount of power and fame and wealth, abuse it, because at the end of the day, they're not good people. And I don't think it's that they became worse people because of the power. I think they were never good people to start with. They just never had a chance to abuse power because they never had the power. But I do think it's true that often very scary people make it to the top. They have certain things that kind of like give them an advantage in a sense. Diddy came off very ambitious. He wanted to make history. He wanted to be a billionaire. He wanted to have not just enough to succeed, he wanted to way outperform others. And so he was very innovative in his approach. And so there's this really heart-wrenching scene where one of the victims in the documentary is talking about how she was living her life in trauma and defeat, and she went into Times Square and saw this image of Diddy with his fist up in the air, and just how victorious he was. And I thought that was so emblematic of how sometimes really scary people make it to the top. They are victorious in part because those scary traits of theirs help them get there. But it certainly wasn't all ambition, it seems, that got him there. The documentary goes into how Diddy took money from artists who were signed with him, producers who worked for him. He, in large part, built his success off the backs of others. And I actually didn't realize this until the documentary, but I realized I don't actually know that many Diddy songs. I've heard of him obviously as like a cultural reference, but I don't actually know many of his songs. And once I actually heard him perform in some of the clips they played, I was like, oh my God, he's literally not even that talented. Obviously, that's my opinion. It's subjective. I'm sure some of you disagree, but I was like, there are way more talented people that he was working with than himself. But because he had financial power over them, that allowed him to control the careers of these artists that now nobody remembers. Nobody remembers them, but they remember his name. And lastly, my last takeaway is that it's only a matter of time before people like this turn on you. I think sometimes people will hear about a difficult person and they go into a relationship with them and they think, I can change him or something like that. I can just do whatever he says. I'll just go along with whatever. I'll be perfectly submissive. We're not going to get into fights. It's going to be cool for me. It never works like that, because eventually you are going to have diverging needs from that person, especially if that person is mistreating you, right? Your needs are going to be, stop mistreating me. And if you try to advocate for yourself, people like this turn on you. It could be as simple as wanting to get paid for work that you did, and that person doesn't want to pay you. You could think, oh my God, I'm going to be like the perfect person. I'm never going to get into a fight with them. That's not how it works. That's not how it works. People like this pick fights over the slightest thing. Some quotes that I noted from the documentary include, he remembers every slight. Whatever I want, I get. I can do what I want. He can cheat on you, but you can't cheat on him. He wanted a girl who just listened to what he said. Also, he was very much described as abusing his power, belittling bandmates, hazing them, sexually harassing them, even much worse. You cannot get along with someone like this. It is only a matter of time before they will create problems in the relationship. And I think that's what was so scary about him in the documentary, was that eventually he had problems with everyone. Eventually he wanted revenge on everyone. And when you have somebody like that, of course, like the documentary is called The Reckoning, eventually there's going to be a reckoning where what was in the dark comes to the surface. So yeah, thank you to the creators of this documentary. I think it's really important information to get out, especially since, in my opinion, justice was not really served with the verdict. Let me know what you thought about the documentary, about what I said in this video, and I'll see you soon.